We all have that one friend who is an extreme hoarder and cannot give up on anything they own or collect. Maybe they hoard
anime figurines,
maybe they collect bottle caps, banana stickers, or I don't know what,
something like woman bras,
traffic lights. But no matter how extreme their collections are, I don't think they will ever be as big and as insane as the collection of what I would call the ultimate hoarder of all time, Leopold II of Belgium. He collected so much stuff from countries because he owned an entire country called the Congo Free State as his personal possession, the same way you would own a car or a headset, but he owned it with all the people living in it and the animals and everything. We're talking about colonialism, baby. He collected that much stuff that after a bit, even though he's a noble man, a king, whatever we want to call it, not a war criminal, he ran out of space, so he had to build an entire place, would call probably the biggest storage in the world, for his colonial possessions. A colonial museum in Tervuren, now a museum that focuses on ethnography and anthropology of Africa. And that's exactly where I decided to go, because I love controversial places. And this is probably one of the most controversial museums in Europe. And I was like, yes, let's go visit the African Museum. And you know, a billionaire had to do with a place when just the building itself sits on a 205 acres garden. It's massive. What is this? And yeah, I didn't have time to visit the whole garden, but it was apparently full of obscure statues. I'm finally here. So I heard recently that ChatGPT is very bad at comedy, so let's test it out. I asked jokes about the Africa Museum in Tervuren that could be possibly not insensitive, so why don't artifacts ever argue?
because the history has already spoken.
I'm sorry for that. So because I cannot make a lot of jokes, because I don't want to be insensitive, I want to say some fun facts about the museum. So first of all, the museum has a lot of artifacts, and 84,000 of them are suspected to be obtained through colonial violence and exploitation.
Not nice.
Of the collection, there's also a lot of artworks and artifacts that we have no idea on how they reached the museum. My guess? Aliens. The museum has 8,000 instruments, 500,000 documents, almost 1 million photographs, as well as 85,000 ethnical objects, including masks, statues, textiles, and tools. The museum has also a collection of jewelry that includes bracelets, earrings, rings, often made of gold, brass, and iron, headpieces, crowns, anklets, armlets, and so many more things. Traditional African clothing such as
Ropes, tunics, skirts, wraps, cotton, silk, leather, animal skin made things.
even ceremonial and ritual clothing such as fashion for wedding.
Made of beads, shells, feather, metalwork.
The museum has also a quite extensive collection of weapons such as swords and knives, execution swords, throwing knives, daggers, short swords, spears, lances made of brass, copper, and ivory, shields made of wood, leather, and woven fibers, bows, arrows, hunting and combat tools, some of them tipped with poisons, also firearms and colonial era weapons.
Practically an arsenal.
The museum has also a big assortment of religious objects, such as power figures and fetishes, masks that were used in rituals and ceremonies, for funeral rituals, fertility ceremonies, and dances in honor of the ancestors. There were also a lot of medicine containers, also a big variety of ancestral and funerary statues, divination tools, oracle figures, but also Christian and Islamic objects.
Some used by missionaries.
Some of these religious objects were stolen from shrines, temples, and burial sites by missionaries, officials, and soldiers who saw these African practices as pagan and superstitious. Imagine if someone did the same and went to the Vatican and stole something very important or any famous Western world church. But I think that what surprised me the most was the fact that there were so many anthropomorphic coffins. Like coffins. But I mean, should I be surprised? Like at that time and also during the Victorian age, it was very common to eat mummies. They believed that mummies had medical powers and they would even have like mummies unwrapping parties, and it was like a very important social event at that time. I feel like I'm born in the wrong generation. I mean, look at how happy they look in this picture. And you could also buy mummy powder in the normal
apothecaries.
Amazing.
But back to the fun stuff in the African Museum. Funerary statues that had inside of them bones and skulls of the ancestors. There's also thrones, quite a few of them. Some are decorated with beads, wood engravings, with leopard skins, even metal.
So fancy.
It's so crazy to think that a lot of this stuff would have never been placed behind a glass by the cultures that originally owned them. So I was thinking, maybe in an alternative universe, there's an alien king who owns a private collection of things from Earth, from humans, for example, the underwear of Elon Musk, the crown of Queen Elizabeth, Belle Delphine bathwater, and a taxidermy of Mr. Beast. And you might think, a human taxidermy is too extreme, right? Apparently, in some museums in Europe, they used to have taxidermies of humans behind glass. Isn't history a fascinating thing? YouTube, please don't age restrict this video. I'm family friendly. And as I was saying, there are so many colonial museums in Europe. This one of Tervuren in Belgium. There are a few ones in France. The one founded by Jacques Chirac in Paris. There's a few ones in Germany, Cologne. There's one in Berlin, in the Netherlands. One in Amsterdam that is quite known for showing Dutch colonial possessions. There's one in Leiden.
That is also known. There's the British Museum, obviously probably the most famous of all of them. The Victoria and Albert Museum of London also has a lot of British colonial possessions. The Pitt Rivers Museum in Oxford. There's one in Lisbon in Portugal, and then there's the Museo de América in Madrid. Obviously, there's way more museums that have at least some colonial or ethnographic objects from other countries. There's one in Vienna, there's one in Denmark, Italy, and Rome, there's in Sweden, in Gothenburg, there's in Stockholm one in Zurich, one in Geneva, Norway, in Bergen, in Finland, in Helsinki, in Czech Republic, in Poland, in Hungary, in Budapest.
It's so crazy to know how many museums in Europe own at least something that is originally from another country or another culture that might have arrived to Europe in very illegitimate ways. Isn't it baffling? There's this famous quote, "Good artists copy and great artists steal," that is often attributed to Picasso. These days it takes a completely different meaning to me because he was suspected of having stolen some African masks from a museum in Paris. So maybe he really meant it.
Let's be kleptomaniacs.
But on a serious note, how do we decolonize a colonial museum? It's kind of a hard question.
Even the horoscopes don't have the answer.
Well, there's the option of giving back the artifacts to the original owners, investing in education and in general in programs that could challenge the colonial narratives. There's the option of creating communities and collaborations through different countries and experts. There's the option of hiring different curators and researchers with different kinds of background coming from different countries. There's so many things you could do, but I think that the most creative I've ever seen in the last years is from the Egyptian Museum of Turin. So in 2017, the director of the Egyptian Museum of Turin came up with this idea that you could get a discount on your ticket, so 2 per 1 if you spoke Arabic. And not only that, you also had to have nationality, citizenship from a country where Arabic is the official language, which is so dumb because that by default excluded Arabic speakers who had just the ancestry and not the nationality from an Arabic speaking country, and also created this assumption that Arabic speakers would have a stronger connection with the ancient Egypt. Like, I don't want to be mean to the director, but someone should have told him that there are at least 22 countries where Arabic is the first or second most popular language, and also Arabic comes in all sorts of shape and shades and dialects. I imagine the person working at the ticket shop in the museum doing an Arabic test to every person that wants to get this deal.
Now tell me, what's the article of Apple? You don't know it? Go back to Duolingo.
And another thing that they were criticized for was the promotional material, where they essentially represented Arabic speakers in the most stereotypical way.
Because who doesn't love a healthy dose of stereotypes on public transport, on ads, on all sorts of medias?
So good. So another thing I want to talk about that was very present in the museum were the tools used by Belgian authorities to control Congolese society during colonialism. From weapons used to inflict physical pain and punishments to anyone rebelling to the status quo, to the ID cards, the fact that they introduced them in Congo and people didn't have them before. It's a way to control society, and people had to carry an ID card even while walking within their own village.
Sounds stressful.
To even the school uniforms they had to wear, the books they had to use that were meant to brainwash them into believing they were not civilized and that the Belgian culture and European one was superior. The museum had also a lot of pictures documenting the segregation, European-only zones and African quarters, the forced police that was actually Congolese soldiers under Belgian officers, and obviously also the forced labor, the extraction of palm oil and rubber that only the king could profit from.
Not like other girls.
But I believe that a thing I should address absolutely is the ethnographic gaze. Well, I think it's unfair to consider an African mask created for a shamanic performance or a religious sculpture taken from a shrine as an ethnographic artifact, while Michelangelo's Pietà in the Vatican is considered an artwork, a masterpiece, while it serves pretty much the same function because it's in a church.
It's a double standard.
The distinction obviously it's on a Eurocentric bias, because when you have an African mask and you place it inside an ethnographic museum, you frame it as an artifact, a cultural or anthropological object that represents a society, rather than as an artwork that could be evaluated for its technique, its form, its emotional impact, and not only for its cultural function. Like the boundary between art and artifact is totally constructed, and the shift obviously depends on the frame, because if you place the same masks in a place that is theoretically meant just for art, then the shift is quite big. I think a good way to illustrate how the context shapes our perception of something is that prank that happened in 2016 when these pranksters decided to place a pair of glasses on the floor inside the MoMA. And all the visitors treated these glasses as an artwork, and nobody questioned the legitimacy of this object on the floor. Some people even took pictures. I think that highlights how easily objects can be redefined based on the context and the way they are presented, and how the line between art and ethnographic objects is quite thin, and why we should reconsider some things more as artworks, and how our continuous perception of these things as ethnographic objects is kind of colonial. It's colonial. Some of these things don't deserve to be here, and maybe I'm currently a little bit criminal being here and appreciating them behind glass. I'm no lawyer, but it looks like I committed at least 3 crimes being here. First of all, failure to report a crime, because I know that some of these masks are stolen. And you know what? I also know some of the people who stole them. Not personally, but I know who they are. Second, trafficking in stolen goods, which is if someone knowingly buys, possesses, or benefits from stolen property, which I am doing right now because I'm vibing with these masks, because I'm vibing with the stolen things in this museum, and I'm enjoying them, appreciating them, and gaining something spiritually and culturally from them. Last but not least, aiding and abetting, which means when someone is actively helping someone that committed a crime or evading justice, which is what I'm doing right now, because I still didn't call the police for all of this. It's also called obstruction of justice in some countries. But will there ever be justice? One thing I learned from this museum today is just how fresh the violence inflicted by Belgium and other colonial powers still feels. Congo only gained independence in 1960. That's incredibly recent. Probably some grandmas are still celebrating. The consequences of colonialism are not just history. They're still here. They're tangible. They're real. In fact, if you're probably holding a phone right now, you are part of the problem. If you're watching this video on any device, parts of it may be containing cobalt mined by children in Congo, because Congo supplies 70% of the world's cobalt. And some of these companies still profiting from this business were founded during colonialism, are a direct legacy of colonialism. So some people call it new colonialism, but that's a whole other can of worms. And non-fun fact, the uranium used for the bombs that destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki was extracted in Congo, because Congo doesn't have only cobalt, they have so much more spicy stuff. And this company that legally owned this place for 60 years and had some British shares also extracted some other nice things from there, like radium, zinc, cadmium, germanium, manganese, silver, gold.
They made profit.
Some of these historical pictures remind me so much of the classic Facebook man with fish pic. It's so funny and also not funny at the same time. But now, before the police catches me for not reporting the crime, hope you enjoyed this video.